Welcome to the Nameless.
I worked security there. That night, a store appeared that wasn't on any map. I remembered the smell first. Old carpet, dust, something faintly sweet like plastic left in the sun. I was halfway through my shift, walking the lower concourse, when I realized the lights ahead of me were on. Not emergency lighting, store lighting. Bright, clean, the kind malls used to show off new openings. That alone didn't make sense. The mall had been closed for years. Everything was dark, sealed, gutted. Everything except that store. I stopped walking and checked my radio, expecting a call I had missed. There was nothing, just static, soft and steady. I stood there longer than I should have, staring at the glow spilling onto the tile, trying to remember if that space had ever been occupied before. I took the job because it was easy. That was the pitch anyway. Overnight security at the Briarwood Center, a dead mall about 20 minutes outside a shrinking town in western Pennsylvania.
The place had shut down almost a decade earlier after a slow collapse. Anchor stores pulled out, smaller shops followed, and then one winter they locked the doors and never reopened. A developer bought it cheap, talked about revitalization, then disappeared. Since then, it just sat there. My job was to walk the halls, check doors, log temperatures, and make sure nobody broke in to steal copper or spray paint murals. Most nights, nothing happened. I listened to podcasts through one earbud, drank bad coffee, and counted steps. The mall had its quirks, random drips from the ceiling, air vents that moaned when the wind picked up, but nothing that made me uneasy. It felt empty in a normal way, like an abandoned warehouse or a closed school. There were maps posted at every major intersection, faded directories behind scratched plexiglass showing the layout from its last operating year. I studied them out of boredom sometimes, tracing the old food court, the movie theater wing, the department stores that anchored each end. I knew the place better than I knew my own apartment. That was why the light bothered me so much. The directory near the escalators didn't show a store where the glow was coming from. According to the map, it should have been an empty shell, one of those narrow units that never lasted more than a year, even when the mall was alive. A placeholder space, beige walls, roll-down gate. I had checked it earlier that night. The gate was down, locked, dark. I told myself maybe I was misremembering. Fatigue does that. You fill in gaps without noticing. I started walking again, slower now, my boots tapping too loudly against the tile. As I got closer, I saw the storefront clearly. Full glass front, no gate. Inside, shelves stood neatly stocked, evenly spaced, like a retail showroom frozen in time.
There was a sign above the entrance, black letters on a white background. No logo, no branding, just words. Here. That was it. No font flair, just plain block letters, slightly off-center. I laughed, quietly, because it felt like the right response. Some kind of prank, I figured. Maybe a film crew had snuck in. Maybe the developer was finally doing something and forgot to notify the night staff. It wouldn't be the strangest thing I'd seen. I stepped closer and looked through the glass. The shelves were filled with things that didn't quite register as products. Boxes without labels, plastic-wrapped items shaped wrong for anything familiar. Everything was spotless, no dust. The lights hummed softly overhead, the sound warm and steady, like a grocery store at midnight. The door was open. I stood there for a long time before I realized I was holding my breath. I exhaled and felt foolish. My radio crackled once, then went quiet again. I told myself I'd log it, call it in, do what I was supposed to do. That meant checking it. The threshold felt heavier than it should have. I remember that clearly, like stepping into a space where the air had weight. The smell changed too, cleaner,
sharper. It reminded me of a mall from my childhood, back when everything was new and polished, and you believed places like that would always exist. The floor inside was carpeted, not tile. Gray, low pile, unmarked. My footsteps made almost no sound. I looked back once, just to keep my bearings. The concourse behind me was dark, the emergency lights casting long shadows. The contrast made the store feel too bright, like a stage. I took 3 steps in and stopped. Something was wrong with the shelves. They were arranged in rows, but the aisles didn't line up properly. I could see the end of one aisle from the middle of another at an angle that shouldn't have been possible.
The space felt larger than the storefront should allow. Not dramatically so, but enough to make my stomach tighten. I told myself it was an optical illusion. Mirrors, maybe. Clever design. I reached out and touched the nearest shelf. It was warm. That's when I noticed the sound. Under the hum of the lights, there was something else. A low, distant murmur. Not voices exactly, more like the noise of a crowd heard through walls. Indistinct, constant, impossible to locate. "Hello?" I said. My voice sounded wrong in there, flat, like it had been absorbed before it could echo. No answer. I walked deeper, counting my steps without realizing I was doing it. The items on the shelves started to look more familiar the longer I stared at them, not because I recognized them, but because my brain insisted on assigning meaning. A box became a toaster. A wrapped shape became a pair of shoes.
The longer I looked, the more convinced I felt that this was a normal store and I was the strange thing inside it. I reached the back wall and felt a jolt of surprise when my hand met another aisle instead. The store extended farther than it should have. I turned around slowly, trying to retrace my path. The entrance was gone. There was no glass front behind me, just more shelves, stretching out in neat, endless rows. The lighting was the same everywhere. No shadows, no dim corners. I checked my watch. It was still ticking, but the second hand seemed sluggish, like it was moving through syrup. I didn't panic, not right away. I did what training tells you to do when something doesn't make sense. I tested it. I walked in a straight line, keeping my hand on the shelf to my right. I counted 50 steps, 100. The shelves never ended. The murmur grew slightly louder, then softer, without any pattern. I tried the radio again. Nothing. That was when I noticed the other movement. At the end of an aisle far ahead, something shifted. Not fast, just enough to catch my eye. I stopped walking. The movement stopped too. I waited. My heart rate picked up, steady and controlled, the way it does before you admit you're scared. "Is someone there?" I asked. The murmur paused. For a split second, the store was silent. Then the sound resumed, louder than before, closer. I backed up, keeping my hand on the shelf. My foot bumped something soft. I looked down. A shopping basket sat on the floor behind me. I was sure it hadn't been there before. Inside it were items I recognized instantly, even though I couldn't explain how. A keychain like the one I lost years ago. A paperback book with a bent cover I remembered reading on a bus. Small, specific things. Things that belonged to me. I left the basket where it was and turned away from it. I didn't want to think about how it got there. I focused on walking, on finding the exit that had to exist somewhere. The store couldn't be infinite. That wasn't possible. The aisles began to narrow. The shelves pressed closer together, forcing me to turn sideways. The murmur resolved into something almost like breathing. In and out. Slow.
patient. I thought about the maps on the wall outside, the neat lines, the certainty of them. I wondered if anyone had ever updated them, or if they were just artifacts, like everything else in the mall. Eventually, I saw the glow change ahead of me, a darker patch, like a shadow cast by something tall. I moved toward it, relief pushing me forward despite the fear crawling up my spine. The exit appeared suddenly. Glass front, dark concourse beyond. I didn't hesitate. I stepped through and stumbled onto the tile, the familiar cold shock grounding me. I turned immediately, expecting to see the store behind me. There was nothing there. Just a blank wall. Beige. Cracked.
A locked roll-down gate with a layer of dust so thick it looked untouched for years. I stood there until my breathing slowed. My radio crackled, then a voice came through asking for a status check. I answered, my voice steady, and said everything was fine. I finished my shift without incident. In the days that followed, I told myself it had been a stress hallucination, lack of sleep, my brain filling in emptiness with something more interesting. That explanation worked until I checked the logbook. At 2:17 a.m., in my own handwriting, was an entry I didn't remember making. Checked here, all quiet. I quit a week later, found another job in town. I didn't go back to the mall after that, not even during the day. I avoided that stretch of road without really meaning to. Last month, I drove past it by accident. The Briarwood Center was being torn down. Fences up, heavy machinery parked where the entrance used to be.
I slowed, looking for the spot where the store had appeared. There was a temporary sign zip-tied to the fence listing upcoming developments: apartments, retail, a grocery store. At the bottom, in smaller print, was a placeholder name for one of the units. Here. I didn't stop to read the rest. I kept driving, watching the rearview mirror until the mall disappeared from sight. Even now, I sometimes think about that basket on the floor and the way the store seemed to know what I was missing before I did.